So I went for dinner quite a while ago now with this guy that I was pretty interested in, and he knew what I did, and we sort of bumped into each other, and what are you doing? Let's go for dinner. And I knew about the situation that he'd been through, but he didn't know that I knew. So I was like, tell me. Like, there's no pressure, and he was able to be unencumbered. And basically he went through like a tough cancellation where kind of the whole world came down to bear on him. And he was telling me this story. I was in a very interesting time. I was like being very reflective. And he said, my whole life I'd been worried that I was a coward. I was terrified that I was a coward. But I'd never been through a situation where I'd had to bring absolutely everything to bear on my life. And I'm a hard man, and I like to hang around with hard men, and I like to shoot guns and do jiu-jitsu and be around Navy SEALs and stuff like that. But I always had this fear in the back of my mind that I might secretly be a coward. And then he said the cancellation thing happened, and it wasn't a very difficult 1-rep max. It wasn't a really hard CrossFit workout. It was something outside of his control. And he used this term that I love, and he said, I could always hear my better self clearing his throat in the room next door. And I always wondered what would happen if I had to really, really wrangle everything, if the whole world came crashing down on me. And I wanted to work out whether or not I was a coward. And he said, thankfully, he kicked the door in and came through. But I just love that I could always hear my better self clearing his throat in the room next door. But he'd never been fully tested. Done lots of hard things, a lot of acclaim, very successful, blah, blah, blah. But we all know, that's your thing, right? Like, but I'll know about whether or not you've left something on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always just 5% still in the tank when he was doing things, about how he felt, about how invested he was. He always had a get out of jail free card in one way or another. And I love that. I could always hear my better self clearing his throat in the room next door.
2 things on that. So I think if we're consolidating some of the points we were making earlier, the "but I'll know" refrain, I think that a lot of the personal excellence comes down to making the "but I'll know" more important than the "what will everyone else think?" Because I think the true test of whether you're a quote perfectionist or not is if everyone else in the room says it's exceptional, and then you say, "But I'll know it's not because I don't think it's exceptional yet." If you still break what everyone else believes is beautiful so that you can make the thing that you make it the way you want it to make, or make it the way you want it to be, I think that is probably like the truest test of whether or not you really do value your own opinion over those of other people's. And if you really want to be true to the quote, the art, whatever your art is, art, I'm using it as a generic term. It could be the career or even like the financial projections that you're supposed to do at your company. Like, there is a way you could do it and do it absolutely excellent. And there's a way you could do it that you could phone it in and probably not get in trouble. But the things that you'd know, and then you'd be the type of person who always phones it in. And that to me is disgusting. And that would make me disgusted with me. And that is the thing that would make me want to peel my skin off, because I would hate me. And I think that's why so many people do hate them, because they do settle and they do make these things and they do know and still ignore it. And so they ignore the man in the other room who's clearing his throat. And they shut the door and they lock it and they never let that guy in. And so they look like everyone else, they act like everyone else, and they get what everyone else gets.
America was built on the backs of men who smoked cigarettes, drove without seatbelts, and had bacon for breakfast. If you miss your biohacking routine this morning, you're going to be okay. There's a time for leverage, but there's also a time for violence, which is just brute force. People get really obsessed with optimal, which is getting the most bang for your buck. But there's also maximizing, which is just getting the most bucks. You lose more life trying to optimize everything than just living it. The stress of trying to be perfect is killing you more quickly than your imperfections.
Mm. I think that's an ode to being willing to take huge amounts of imperfect action towards one goal, and being willing to sacrifice other things for an extended period of time, despite the fact that other people say they're making a sacrifice. Like when we enter seasons, I call it, the season of no, which is where I have an extended duration where I say no to almost everything. And most people say that's unbalanced. And they hurl that as though it's a bad thing. They're like, that's so unbalanced. And you're like, yes, that's the point. Because if I had a balanced outcome, then I won't have the outsized return on this one thing. And so again, like there's so many of these little insults that people will throw at you, like you're unbalanced, you changed, that they intend as insults. But if you actually don't take your society programmed response and say, oh, they mean to insult me. But if you actually think about what they're saying something that's true. And then we just need to be okay with that truth because that was the choice we made to begin with. And so I think about that a lot, which is like, how many things do people tell me that they intend to insult me with that I can take as a compliment?
Subscribe.
Subscribe. Subscribe. Subscribe.
Subscribe. Hustler Definity.
Hustler Definity. Hustler Definity. Hustler Definity.
Hustler Definity.